Thanks for joining, David, Thomas, to everybody out there. A warm welcome to this webinar hosted by Relay 42. We will be discussing the foundations of CDPs, also known as customer data platforms, the what, the when, the why of CDPs, and why are they important. That's a whole lot of ground to cover. But I'm sure we'll be able to share some valuable insights with the audience. My name is Paul van Teylingen. I'll be your host for today. But as you can see, there's two experts on the line as well. David, Thomas, maybe you'd like to introduce yourself briefly to the audience, starting with our guest, David Raab.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So I am David Raab. I am the founder and CEO of the Customer Data Platform Institute, which promotes better use of customer data in general, which often involves, of course, CDPs in particular. My background is many, many years as a marketing technology consultant, and before that, I actually worked for a living as a marketer.
Thank you. Thank you. Thomas?
Yeah, Tomas Salfischberger, one of the two founders of Relay 42. Now, just over 10 years ago, we're celebrating our anniversary this year. Background in big data before it was called big data, and of course, honored to be sharing the panel with David today.
All right, never too old to learn, right? All right. Before we dive in the topic itself, a couple of practical pieces of information, just sharing some information on Demio itself. So on the top right-hand side, there are two logos that allow you to manage the size of your screen. The angled arrows will increase to full screen. The arrow pointing right will expand or collapse the chat and poll window. We will have all attendees muted. That's nothing personal, but that keeps the webinar practical and manageable. But please don't hesitate to ask us questions, because supporting us in the background are Kalina, and you've seen her in the chat, and Josephine, who will be addressing questions that are either posted publicly or privately through the chat. If you'd like to post a private chat, please address it to Kalina or Josephine at Josephine at Kalina. And we'll try to address these during the webinar. And if there's time at the end, we'll try to manage that as well. We will be doing a few polls. Once activated, it will appear in the chat and poll section on the right-hand side of the screen. So results will be shared as they come in, and anonymous also for us. So please feel free to participate. Because it will increase the value of the insights for all attendees, including yourself. So how do your peers view a specific topic? So having said that, we'd like to test the polls with a practice run. And the poll is, I think this webinar is going to be awesome, let's go. Or my boss made me attend. I'll be answering emails or taking calls in the meanwhile. Now, okay, so motivation is where it should be. We're at 100%. It's going to be awesome. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. All right. So we're up for a great webinar. Yeah. So let's dive in. A quick overview of the agenda. It's very straightforward. We'd like to give the floor to David on the first 10 minutes and share his views and insights on CDP foundations, on the technology itself, the positioning in the marketing stack of various types of CDPs, and then take that as a starting point for a fireside chat between Thomas and David. But we've also been asked by David to keep it highly interactive, and that's what our intention also. So if there's any questions that we would like to address, or we see them coming in, which are relevant at this point in time, we might take the opportunity and get them in there as well. Anything to add from your end, David, Thomas?
No, all good.
All right, excellent. Then another poll, a little bit more serious, just to get a feel for where you are on CDPs, directed at our audience. So how well do you know CDPs? You've heard it, have you heard it frequently, but that's about it. You've already done some research. You're actually considering implementing a CDP, or, and we've seen, so this is an honesty check, we've seen, of course, the list of registrants. I'm working for a CDP vendor, which is fair enough. Nice, you can all see the answers coming in, and it's actually quite an interesting distribution, changing a little bit, but the foundational knowledge in the sense that have done some research and actually considering implementing a CDP at around 66%, still increasing. So, all right, so we're not talking actual beginners. There's quite some inkling on CDPs in the audience already. So that's good to know. Thank you all for your input. With that, David, I'd like to give you the floor.
Okay, thank you. And Thomas, feel free to chat back and forth a little as I talk, since no one really should be made to suffer to listening to me talk nonstop for even 10 minutes. But let's continue. Good that we have a knowledgeable audience here, but we'll still start with the basics. What's a CDP in the first place? And the official CDP Institute definition is that it's packaged software that builds a persistent, unified customer database that's accessible to other systems. And that's actually a very carefully crafted definition, because we need to include and exclude certain other things that also manage customer data. There actually are a lot of systems that manage customer data. We'll talk about the different kinds of systems in a few minutes, but this definition says it's packaged as something you buy, persistent unified customer database. It actually stores data, doesn't just shuffle it back and forth. And it actually is customer focused as opposed to a financial focus or other kind of focus. And it unified in the sense that it brings together all the data from all the different systems. And accessible to other systems means that it shares data. It's not simply assembling a database for its own purposes, which there are a great many systems that do it well. So there's quite a bit going on inside what may seem like a deceptively simple definition. So if we go ahead now, we can talk about, well, why now? Why is the CDP thing? CDP, I coined the term. It's my major claim to fame in life. I have 3 children, but really CDP is the favorite child, apparently, at least the one that I'm best known for. In 2013 and 2016, the category kind of took off for whatever reason. But so what's behind this growth? And there's certainly a growing need for unified data. There's simply people want to create those unified customer experiences that we all talk about, and you can't do that without unified data. People tried to do it without CDP using the existing solutions like a CRM system or a data management platform or a data warehouse, and none of those quite worked for a variety of reasons. We'll talk a little about that later as well. But basically, there was a gap in the marketplace, and marketers, users, demanded that the solution arise. And of course, the free market system does work at least sometimes, and the demand was in fact filled. New technology became available in roughly this time frame. They made it easier to do certain things, because back in the day, 10, 15 years ago, you would have built a data warehouse using a relational database, and that really didn't work very well for what we had here, because a lot of the web data is not really structured in the way that a data warehouse can handle. So we had new technology that became available that made it possible to do things in a different way, and the CDPs took advantage of that technology. And of course, the growth of privacy regulation in the past few years in particular has added more pressure to sort of doing a better job of managing your customer data. So Thomas, do you have any other things? Why do you think it all happened?
I think I have a very related anecdote about almost the birth of Relay 42 as a platform is exactly in the time frame you mentioned. Whereas just over 10 years ago, I think the very first technologies around also the Hadoop and big data ecosystem were all in their 0 point something beta versions. And that's roughly the time that Relay42 was founded, and we started in that exact direction. So I think that time frame indeed is something that was also created by possibilities on the technology side. If you were to try to do this, let's say 12 or 13 years ago, you wouldn't have succeeded because the tech wasn't there. Maybe somewhere internal at Yahoo when they were a little bit earlier on this kind of thing, but not really around. And exactly like you said, we saw the same sort of really acceleration happening between 2013 2016, both driven by privacy changes and by sort of a realization on the marketing side. I think that unification became more important. Right? We at that time said the world used to be easier. You ran one campaign on one channel, and you're done with it. And nowadays we see that the unification is really getting key.
Yeah, at least half the CDPs were started by marketers who couldn't find a solution and decided to build their own and then say, hey, everybody else must need this too. Of course, unfortunately, they all saw it at the same time, which is why there's 100-odd CDPs out there, but that's okay. So, all right, so moving along though, let's go to talk again how CDP differs from these other technologies. Okay, so the CDP, there's our definition again there: packaged software, persistent, unified, accessible customer database. That is the definition of a CDP. So of course it ticks all the boxes, and we'll talk about those last two rows but in a minute. But if you look at the other things that also again store customer data, we have data lakes and data warehouses, and of course they're not the same thing, but where they differ from a CDP most clearly is that they're not packaged software. They're custom projects that you build yourself or your IT department builds for you, which has all kinds of limits, obviously, and just imposes a lot of costs and time delays. But they are persistent. They can be unified. A data lake's not really unified because it's just kind of a place you dump your data, and then you have to do work on top of it. A data warehouse done properly, if it's a customer data warehouse, can be unified. And of course, they're designed for access. Data hubs and tag managers, these are the MuleSofts and the tag managers of the world. They are packaged software, but they don't store data. They're not persistent. They simply take the data from one system and push it into another system. So they're kind of like a switchboard, if you will. And that's very important and very useful. And sometimes that's all you can do because you don't really want to store the data because there's too much of it, or it's not even your own data, or it changes too quickly. But it doesn't allow you to do certain things because persistence is really important. If you want to track a customer over time, you want to in particular track their identifiers, how they've changed over time because they got a new email address or a new phone number or a new device, whatever you're tracking, you really have to store that someplace because your operational systems often will throw away the old stuff. CRMs, marketing automation systems, marketing clouds, all those sort of marketing systems are indeed packaged. They store data, but they don't store all the data. They only store some of the data. Usually they store the data they create themselves or that's created within them. So to get that complete picture of a customer, you really have to go somewhere else, and they're not really designed to import large masses of external data. Sometimes they can import a little of it, but they really weren't designed to store all of it. And the CDP, in our definition, can store all the detail. Doesn't throw anything away, at least at the start. So the CRMs and the marketing automation often used or tried to be used. That's where a lot of those early founders who found the existing tools didn't work. They started out trying, I'll just do this in my CRM. I'll just do this in my marketing automation system. And they just found they just simply couldn't get it done.
Yeah, I guess that comes back to what you mentioned on your first, on your earlier slide on the growing need for unified data, right?
Yep. Yep, you had all these because you had your marketing automation over here and your CRM over there. And in B2B, they would integrate pretty well, but not so much in B2C. And then you had all your web data is really the other big domain, but also your purchase data, which isn't typically in any of those other systems. So they had to have some place to pull it all together to get that unified view of the customer. Data management platforms, often presented as, the place to store all your first-party data. It sounded a lot like a CDP. Way oversold in Europe, in my humble opinion, and causes a problem for a lot of the CDP vendors because people say, well, you're saying exactly what the DMP guy told me 5 years ago, and it didn't do what it was supposed to do, and why should I believe you? But DMPs are a very different technology. They were designed really to store cookies and to support audiences for advertising, very, very specific use case. They're optimized for that. They're very good at that, but the way you do that to build audiences quickly and select them quickly is you throw away a lot of data and you summarize it. And if it's cookies, you have to throw it away after 30 or 60 days anyhow, because the cookies themselves go away. So simply not designed to do the same thing, and not capable of storing all the rich detail in particular that a CDP wants to store, because a CDP doesn't want to throw anything away.
I'm curious whether this resonates with the audience. We don't have a poll prepared, but maybe in the chat window you can indicate whether this is a recognizable process that you've gone through, as in looking at DMPs, understand that was getting presented, the understanding, hey, this is you can store all your data, including first-party data, and then in the end it turns out, hey, we actually can't fulfill our needs. Is there anybody that would like to respond to that in the chat? It may be a private response. If we don't see anything coming in, we'll move on to the next slide.
Well, while we give everyone a little bit of time to type, Paul, I see that there's also a question from Ed, who asks, are we going to talk about the decisions and delivery row, and why are there question marks? Which I think is exactly what we wanted to talk about. Okay,
don't worry, we'll get to that, but I'm glad you're paying attention. We give it, Ed gets an extra point for reading the slides. Yeah, and specifically, can we get to the last column there about email and web CMS? Those are the operational systems. Those are the systems that are built to deliver messages. As you see, they don't do much of what a CDP does, but they're really good at making decisions, so marketing campaigns, deciding who gets which message, and delivering those messages. That's what they do. And the reason that those rows are on this chart is simply to make the point that we're not saying CDP does everything. It's not a CRM system. Yeah. It's not really even a DMP. There's some overlap, and certainly is not a system to send out your emails, although some CDPs can do that. So the decision and delivery have question marks because some CDPs do that, some CDPs don't do that. Now, there are people who would argue that a CDP should do that, and should is an interesting word, like is there an ethical obligation? I don't think so. So not too much morality involved here. But some CDPs do and some CDPs don't. So if you need a CDP to do that, then your CDP should do that. But there's not, like, the essence of the CDP really is the assembly of the customer profiles, and that, at least in my personal view. The other things are options that may be very important to you as a user, but are not the essential nature of the CDP. So that's why decisions and delivery, which are extremely important business functions, every business needs them, just only some businesses need them integrated in their CDP. Hopefully that answers that question. And I also see a question here about MDM, which could be another column, MDM Master Data Management. Systems that have a more limited function. They will usually, what they'll work with is only identifying data, and it could be personal identifiers, but it also could be identifiers related to product or other domains of data. And they identify and they unify and they sort of clean them up. So it's a limited function. A CDP has to have that unification capability, because you can't build the unified profiles if you can't assemble the different identifiers and link them to the same person. Whether the CDP does that or actually uses a third-party system like an MDM is okay. We don't particularly in our world consider that has to be integrated with the CDP. It simply has to be available to CDP. But the MDMs are really mostly about that data unification and then that cleaning of the identifiers, not storing all the detail. Now, as in everything else, there are MDM systems that do a lot more than that. But basically, most MDMs are more limited in the amount of data that they store than a CDP. You wouldn't ordinarily store transactions or web behaviors in an MDM, as a concrete example.
Yeah, and we get asked the MDM question relatively often, so it's a very good question. Thanks for asking it. I think for me, another distinction is also the purpose of the data. Most MDM kind of systems are really based to do your internal transactions of exactly known customers, whereas CDP, of course, having a big role in marketing, typically also deals with people that are still prospect customers, leads, even anonymous website visitors that could fit in there. The purpose of the data is also a bit broader, which typically means, and that now we go a bit in technical detail, typically means a different way of storing. And MDM has a lower volume, much more sort of traditional database oriented kind of approach, whereas CDP, as David also just mentioned, came more out of the big data kind of era, where our click behavior, where all the detail is part of that, which requires a different kind of technology, a different structure to the data.
Right. Right. Again, every system, in fact, the next slide says exactly that. Every system, so go ahead to the next slide there, Paul. Every system on that one in MDM as well, they're all optimized for what their purpose is, and they're all very good at what they do. But different systems are optimized for different things, and only the CDP is optimized to create that complete, accessible customer data. That's why a CDP is different, and that's why you probably need a separate CDP. All right, so let's move ahead a little on to the next slide, so where the CDP fits into the scheme, because again, there are all these other systems. And if you kind of look at how your various data flows happen from a kind of a customer point of view, we have our operational systems or our source systems over there on the left, which are feeding data into the CDP, and the CDP again loads it and transforms it and creates that database that we just talked about, and can have a segmentation capability. All CDPs have a segmentation capability. And then they're going to push that typically out into analytical systems, into campaign type systems. Those are decision things on the previous chart, and then out to our delivery systems that actually send the messages. So there are all these different functions in your company that kind of are required before you can actually send a message to a customer. The data has to flow through all these steps, through all these different classes of systems. Now, again, the question is, does the CDP just do what that nice blue box is, what the CDP does? Well, all CDPs do that. By definition, that's what a CDP does. But if you go on to the next slide, Paul, you'll see that there are other things. Some CDPs only do that. Some CDPs do that plus the analytics. Some also have campaign functionality. Some have delivery functionality. Some even have operational functionality. Now, if you get down to something that has a delivery functionality like an email system or a web content management system, or operational capability like an e-commerce system, for example, they could have a CDP inside. As long as it has those CDP functions, as long as it meets the definition, it legitimately could be called a CDP. But you know, your e-commerce system, it might have a CDP inside of it, but to call it a CDP, it's like saying that, you know, my car is really a radio because it has a radio inside of it. No, it's a car that has a radio. So an e-commerce system with the CDP inside is still an e-commerce system, or what we would call it an operational CDP, but it's really just has the CDP inside as one of many functions. So I don't know, hopefully that clarifies a little why there's so much variety of CDP, because different people need different configuration. Some people have all the other things and they just want that data CDP because they have great analytics and they have great campaigns and they have great delivery systems. Other people don't really have such good analytics. They say, you know, let me buy one system that does both. That way I don't have to worry about integrating the two, even though CDPs are built to be integrated. So I'll get an analytics CDP, or maybe I'll need all three and I'll get a campaign CDP. So I can find a CDP to fill whatever my gaps are, whatever the scope of those gaps are. That's why there's so many different kinds of CDPs.
Yeah, so there's basically the summary of this slide and also the discussion before is there's no one solution that fits your specific needs in every case. It's not me as a buyer going out and buying an operations CDP, because that covers everything. It's about assessing your individual needs and finding a CDP that fits in that fills the needs gap that you have specifically in your situation.
Exactly. It's all about where are my gaps? What am I trying to do? Where are the gaps that are stopping me from doing it? And what does it take to fill those gaps? And if I can find a CDP that fits my gaps nicely without buying a lot of redundant things, because maybe I buy an e-commerce system that happens to have a CDP, but then I throw away everything except the CDP. Well, I spend a lot of money on a system I'm not going to use. So I probably want to find something that has a bit more close fit with what I have and doesn't have a lot of extra things. On the other hand, you know, to make the case, if you find a really great analytics CDP that does all your data management and you have good analytics, but if that's the best tool for you for whatever reason, okay, you know, you buy and you don't use some of those features. That's all right too. So it's unfortunately there's no simple answer. There's not like one best CDP for all purposes. Different people have different needs. The good news is you can find a CDP that fits you. You know, it's just like shoe sizes. There's no one shoe size that fits everyone, but you can find a shoe to fit your foot, one would hope. I don't know why I brought up shoes, but I like shoes.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving right along before you start speculating about what else I like. We'll just have a summary here that, CDP solutions are the only systems optimized for complete accessible customer data. And we said that every system's optimized for something, and that's what CDP is good at. CDPs help businesses build that 360 view of the customer, because that's what they're for. That's the primary purpose of the CDP, is to assemble that 360 view, those unified customer profiles, while being compliant with privacy regs, because privacy is very important. I think we'll probably talk just during our chat about how CDPs relate to privacy, but they're, the spoiler alert, they're good for privacy. And the core function is that data unification, and then other vendors, often other functions that go beyond that. So that's kind of what we would want you to take away. Hopefully that helps clarify things a bit. And I think.
Thanks a lot, David, for sharing those insights with us. At this point, I don't see any additional questions in the chat, so I think it's all crisp and clear. We've had some nice interaction with the audience already. That's excellent. So keep the questions coming. What we'd like to do is move towards, well, what we branded the fireside chat section. And what we would like to do is share a few statements with you both, and well, basically duke it out. Now, share your thoughts on the considerations, on on the perspectives that trigger these statements. There's a lot of news, content, press on CDPs, amongst other things, a lot of investments going on. But yeah, as with technology, other technologies have also seen a very, I'd say, a hoax in investments. So are CDPs just a hype? David, why don't you?
Who goes first? Yeah.
Yes, they are. I admit it. My God, I'm cut out. The whole thing is a fraud. This is a myth. I'm actually not even in this room. No, I don't think they're a hype. Gartner has its famous hype cycle, and they've been tracking us very nicely. And we're kind of past the first peak of inflated expectations and going down into the trough of disillusionment, which is what happens when people get excited about a technology. And CDP is a very exciting technology because it solves a big problem that a lot of people have that wasn't being solved. So people do get excited, and then they say, oh, it's going to do everything. Well, no, it's not going to do everything. It doesn't do that decision and delivery stuff, for example. And there are other problems it's not going to solve. It's built for that one purpose. So eventually, again, just following the hype cycle there, the expectations kind of get overwrought, and then people calm down and they begin to understand what a system can really do and what it really can't do. And it's important to understand what they don't do as well. And that's kind of where CDP is right now. Everybody's gotten excited. As you saw in our initial poll there, people kind of, everybody's heard about it. They have some reasonably decent notion about what it is. And now they're just beginning to grasp, okay, what it does and doesn't do. So no, there's something there. People do them. They when we look at polls, and people are mostly happy with what they bought and what they got, and yeah, they might want a better one, but we don't see people saying, forget the CDP thing, I'll just go back to doing it the old-fashioned way.
No, very, very similar from my end. I think one of the reasons, you get a lot of shiny technology popping up, right? And there have been a few that could be more or less hype only. But I think on the CDP side of things, it's really driven by a market development. We actively see consumers use more different channels and go more digital, even more so accelerated by the global pandemic over the last year, where we saw for many clients, we saw traffic rise very, very rapidly. And that trend really means you need some kind of solution to unify that data. So I think it's not a shiny technology hype on its own. It's really something following the reality that marketers are in today, and that's the technology that they need. But then obviously, both David and I would have never said anything else, right? So if we have someone in the chat room that believes differently, fire away.
That's a dangerous question to ask, but it's an interesting one. Is there anybody in the audience who feels CDPs are just a hype and there will be another solution replacing CDPs within 5 to 10 years? Not yet. Good. So we're on the good track. That's the good news. It means we're also here to stay. Yeah, with you mentioned Thomas, Hack. It's among others. So there's basically a basic need driving the growth of the CDP market and growth of CDPs. It's consumer behavior driving the development of CDPs. So another bold statement we'd like to launch at you is you just can't be truly customer centric without a CDP.
Yeah, I think that if you look at that development where consumers are using more channels, where there's more data available, and all those interactions are becoming digital, right? If you have to close your stores, or as we see in, for example, the banking sector where branch offices are rapidly disappearing, then all those interactions are becoming digital, and they're either on the web via chat, they're using WhatsApp for business, they're using chatbots. They're using call centers, they're using all kinds of things that generate all kinds of data. And I think if you don't combine that data in the right way, you cannot really create a personal and customer-centric experience, because you would always be looking at it from a lens of one interaction, right? If you look at, as a business, at your website doing the best possible job, then you're reasoning from one perspective on one end of the spectrum. Whereas if you want to reason with the customer as the central entity, then by very definition, you need to unify and store the data about that customer such that you know who they are, where they are, how you're interacting with them, to then start building a customer-centric strategy. So I would say, indeed, you cannot be customer-centric without a CDP. And then on the other hand, just buying a CDP doesn't immediately make you customer-centric, right? It's the core building block that you then need to continue with.
That's right. It's a tool. You could have the finest tools in the world, but if you don't care about your customers, then of course you're not going to be customer centric. So you really have to have the company culture involved. You have to have the organizational structure involved, the incentives involved. There's lots of things you need to be customer centric. And then, you could argue that the customer centricity is an attitude and has nothing to do with technology, in which case, certainly, your little corner butcher shop probably doesn't need a CDP to be customer centric because it's all in the head of the butcher. Yeah. But once you reach a certain scale where you can't do that on a personal basis, then you probably do need the technology to store that unified customer data and give that consistent experience across channels that, again, people demand. It's not hype, not the vendor saying, oh, this is a cool thing you should do. It's really something that customers expect.
Yeah, I see a remark coming in our chat box on the side, and I think it's a good one. It's CDP is another hype, but it's still confusing, as many products claim that they can achieve the desired outcome. Selecting the right product is tricky, but I think, for me that's a remark I think we all agree with. My answer would be always select Relay 42, but I think David has a better answer.
So that was actually that's a great prelude to our next statement. So where do I begin, right? So also building on Sapon's statement, it is confusing. So where do I start? There's a lot of and that's interesting. A lot of product solutions claim that they can achieve the desired outcome. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that. So if you're considering, a large portion of the audience have done some research, are considering implementing a CDP, so probably have an idea on the business impact that might bring, the strategic advantage. But okay, so where then do I begin in selecting the right CDP for my situation?
Yeah, and I think if we're being very honest here. The right place to begin is not even in selecting the technology, right? It's as David alluded to, it's much more about having the right organization around it first, understanding your business case, understanding what it is that you want to do. How does data unification fit in your digital strategy? What are the kind of messages that you have to set up? And from there, you start to sort of build typically an ecosystem and say, hey, okay, I would need solutions for delivery. I would need solutions for my call center. Which of those do you have? What we see is that the typical larger enterprises have all of those, right? There are mobile messaging platforms in place. There are email solutions in place, digital marketing. In which case, you can look at what is the function I really need, and that helps you select the right type of CDP. Whereas if you have those solutions in place, you would focus on like the either data hub or the analytics CDP side of it, or the campaign one, but not on the delivery end, because you have those solutions. But if your early inventarization of the company and the needs results in a look at a very empty ecosystem, then actually I think you may want to consider looking at your delivery solutions as well. How do I replace those? So it's much more about understanding what it is really that you're trying to achieve. And I think that the biggest risk, and unfortunately one that we still encounter, I would say almost weekly, is going out to market saying, I need a CDP. And then the first question we typically ask is, what is it that you want to do with it? And you get a pretty blank stare and not really an idea of what to do with it. And of course, that's what's creating these comments like CDP is a hype. Yeah, if you're only buying it for the label, then maybe it is. But if you have a clear idea of what to do, then you have a really good starting point.
Yeah, that's exactly the way we talk about it as well. So you always have to start with what your goals are, and then where your gaps are, what's stopping you from meeting those goals, and then figure out what system is going to plug those gaps. And it's so important because people don't do that. They do, as Thomas just said, I need a CDP because my boss told me, or I went to the great webinar and this guy, David Raab, he was just so convincing that I had to have one. I didn't even know what it was. I
want a blue one.
Yeah, I want a blue one.
Mr.
That's
Raab
right.
Sounded very interesting. I
That's
need one.
right. So clearly I must have one because he's so handsome and smart. But it doesn't necessarily work that way. You really have to figure out, is my problem? And the specific problem, okay, that you typically solve with a CDP is sharing data across systems. When we look at CDP use cases, CDPs, they're like bacon, they make everything better. So any kind of customer interaction will be better with better data. So you could argue, CDP is good for everything. But really, when you look at specifically why people buy a CDP, it's because they have data in one system that they want to make it available to a different system. So I want to take what people have done on my website and use that to drive a retargeting campaign in emails. I got to get that data from the website into my email system. And if I have to do it the old-fashioned way, that can take hours or sometimes days and a lot of manual work. The CDP should be able to do that in minutes because it just has that connection built. Or I want to take data and make it available in my call center so the call center agent can see what someone bought. For example, it's got to get out of the purchasing, the order processing system into the call center system. And again, the CDP bridges the gap, but closes the gap between those systems. Those are the kinds of very specific use cases that drive you towards buying a CDP.
Yeah,
if you start with that kind of use case analysis, and this is the path you're on, then you also get much better requirements for the CDP technology. Because if your goal is then indeed, let's say, to connect the website with the call center, then from that use case, it becomes key that the connection is real time, because the call center agent needs to know about what happened in a couple of minutes before the call. But if your use cases are much more, let's say, on the operational side, and everything you send is in postal mail traditionally, maybe you don't even need a real-time solution. It might still sound flashy, but it's not your requirement. I think that is a key part for many as a starting point, is to understand those kind of use cases and what you're trying to achieve, driving the type of technology that you need.
Right, and that gets back to the comments that's in the chat there about the different competencies or the same competencies with different functionalities. It's when you get into the functions and the specifics, that's what tells you what system you need. The example that Thomas just gave about real-time versus batch, great example of that. Okay, you don't know that, and anything, say, yeah, you can share your data, but is it going to share the data? Is it going to function the way you need it to function for this particular use case or this set of use cases? That's how you begin to tell apart the different tools that sound alike, because they all sound alike. They're like, oh, great customer, we're going to give you great customer experience. Well, yeah, they all kind of do, but they do it in different ways for different purposes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's actually a very interesting question in the chat from two perspectives. So it's from Tapan on building a CDP of one's own. So up to now we've been discussing what if you want to buy, if you're considering buying a CDP. The question is how do the considerations in specifically in Tapan's question, how does one choose whether to do analytics focused CDP, operations CDP, or data CDP when building an own CDP? But the underlying topic, maybe for the rest of the audience, could also be, so should I buy or should I build? Is there anything that you would like to share on that? I think David, you come across. Of course, we at Relay. I know Thomas has thoughts, right? But David comes across various types of parties, probably, right? Who buy CDPs and who have built their own platforms.
What we do and build is interesting because it's coming up a lot more. It kind of went away of the issue for a few. Didn't hear too much about it, and now all of a sudden we're getting that a lot. Now, remember, definition is packaged software that builds a unified database. You can't build your own CDP because it's packaged software. If you really think about it, no, you can't build your own CDP because then it's not a CDP. You could build a system that CDP does, of course, is what you're really doing. So, build your own CDP. Could you build a CDP? People are increasingly doing that. The coming in, and so I don't know if people heard what they didn't hear. What build a system he does.
Is the connection breaking up for you as well, Thomas? I think the connection with David was cracking.
We lost David a little bit, but
yeah,
I got enough of his answer to
reproduce. Okay.
Exactly. The key of David's answer is that CDP by definition is packaged software, and of course you cannot build your own packaged software. At the same time, you can build something that does the same kind of functionality, tries to achieve the same purpose. I think in the model that David shared, and that would also be my view on it, is that in that case, you're mostly building a data warehouse, data lake kind of solution, and then sort of assembling it to perform part of those functions. And obviously, I'm extremely biased in this, in the sense that I would always say buy one because we're selling one. But even leaving that behind, I would still think that constructing your own is probably going to take a pretty significant IT investment, as well as maintenance and running connections, etc. That a packaged software vendor would do and split the cost across hundreds of clients, whereas you're doing it only for yourself. So I think in most cases, unless you are, let's say, Amazon.com, it might not be doable and beneficial from a cost perspective to completely build your own.
Yeah, I've actually, as I said, it's come up quite a bit recently, so I've been giving the issue a little more thought and written a couple of blog posts about it, in fact. And what it comes down to is that if your needs are really unique and you can't find a CDP to do that because your needs are unique and you have a complex internal environment and you have the technology staff who could do it, then it might actually make sense to build your own. But unless all those conditions are in place, if you don't have the people who could do it, the resources, you just can't do it. So it doesn't matter. If your needs are very standardized and you can buy a fine package system, then why in heaven's name would you take those very rare development resources who really have way more work than they can do, and you have to choose what you put them on, and put them on something with that you could easily buy? It just doesn't make any sense to do that. Put them on something that they can't buy. So it's not an entirely black and white decision. There are some situations where it may make sense actually to build your own, but you really have to be very careful about it. And I would say that the burden of proof would be on the people who want to build it to show that's the best use of my developers, and I really can't buy something else that will give me what I need.
I think one interesting development we see in that area at Relay 42 is that we have a couple of our, let's say, more advanced clients that have been doing this with us 5-6 years or longer, tend to not build their own, but they do tend to create more of their own in-house solutions linked to the platform. So we see more demand. Originally it was very low. Now we see it really rising quickly for connecting with in-house data science environments. In the early years, everybody just used our models and let us do everything. Nowadays, we see, let's say, banking clients create and link their own risk modeling infrastructure where they have a very advanced team of data scientists that's obviously, being a bank, can do better risk modeling than Relay 42 could do, and link that to us. And I think that's a way better use of your development and data science resources than sort of reinventing that unifying layer, and that's that big part in the middle that is the core of CDP.
Yep, absolutely.
I see a lot more questions popping up.
Yeah, exactly. So this topic is triggering a lot of questions. One that I thought would be interesting to address also is one on you touched upon the goals, right? So it depends on what CDP or what type of CDP would be best fit to fill my gaps, and what would be my goals. How would you formulate these goals, right? Are we then talking about I want to save costs, or I want to so how do you define these? Where would you start?
I usually try to start with more specific use cases. Here's a marketing program I'd like to do. You know, I would like to send text messages to people who had a drop shopping cart. Okay, very specific. And here's again where I run into a problem because I can't get the data from one place to the other. And that's the kind of thing, not, oh, I want to save money or I want to make more revenue, or, you know, because there's a lot of ways to do that. It doesn't really drive specific requirements until you get down. So we argue that people should really be as concrete as possible. And part of the reason beyond just defining requirements is because then you can sit down with the system and have the vendor say, and tell the vendor, walk me through this process. Show me how your system is going to do that. Because until you do that, so you actually have them show you how you're going to get from A to B to C to D, they're just going to say, yeah, our system's great and it does everything. And you're not going to find, well, you know, this system can't get from C to D because there's a gap in the system itself. It just doesn't have that particular function that you need to do whatever it is to get from C to D. And unless you walk them through it, you're not going to know that until the day you buy it and the day you install, and then you sit down to create that first campaign. You get A, oh yeah, A works and B works and C works, and oh my goodness, I can't get from here to D, but I've already signed my contract. I want to find that out before I sign the contract, not after I sign the contract.
Yeah, and we get this question so often that we did a previous webinar with Rogier and me on the topic of what are the typical use cases, just as an early education. And I think that doesn't mean we're doing your homework for you, right? You can't take that list and say, this is what I want to do. But I think it can help in determining what do we see as the title of the webinar, how to get value from a CDP. So what are the use cases we see across our client base that are driving the best results? And typically what we see is that these kind of early steps, if you really have no idea where to get started, tend to be in the acquisition cost or conversion rate increase side of things. So typically marketing driven, because that's where there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. And from there, we see a sort of evolution of the use cases to more advanced setups where customer service is involved, where you look at retention, at happier customers. But those things tend to be a little bit longer use cases that take also longer to evaluate and measure. So the low-hanging fruit is really about who do I sell to, who are the right people, what is the message that converts the best, and how do I deliver it? And then with those kind of use cases in mind, it's a lot easier to sort of have a starting point to go after what David just said, to determine what is it then that I need to do that.
Yeah. Okay, interesting, because this also ties into the question that Himanshu has posted in the chat, in the sense that we started, you can take a problem as a starting point, but also an opportunity. And so Himanshu says, we think we would benefit from one, but how do you then make a case, right? So who drives these normally in enterprises, IT or marketing? And this, I think, is a topic in itself, right? How to select a CDP and how to make sure that you get the funds within an organization. For me, being in sales, it's a low-level program usually, and it involves IT and marketing. But maybe Thomas, I see David dropped out. He will be joining us, I hope, in a matter of seconds. But maybe you can address this topic. So how do you make a case of it internally? And I think we can tie in Daniel's question: how do you effectively prepare your IT team for the CDP? These are organizational questions around selecting and implementing a CDP.
Yeah, and they're closely related, right? Because what we typically see is that either the organization is in the place where, like David just described, where you know what you want to do. Let's say you want to take web data into email, or web data into digital campaigns, or any of those kind of interactions. And then it's typically more an IT-driven decision on what that means, right? In which kind of system is that data? How do I connect it? And then the business case is also already typically clear, because you know what you want to do, and you just need a technology to achieve that goal, and it becomes more of an IT project. What we see, and I would say it's almost 50-50 in sort of inbound questions on this topic, is the other half is very much a marketing driven thing, where you're not yet have that kind of problem where you say, I clearly know how to take data point A into system B to achieve this use case, but you're much more in a goal-oriented direction. So you know you need to, let's say, decrease your cost of acquisition on certain channels, because you can see by market benchmark that it's not competitive, and then you think data is the way to do it. It's much higher level kind of approach. In which case, it helps to start building a little bit on existing results, or at least that's how I often help clients with this: is look at what volume do you have, what does your current setup looks like, and what can we do with available, and there are lots of them, public case studies from others in your industry, where we know what the impact of that typically is, and let's say where these kind of use cases, as we discussed in the other webinar, have sort of a rough estimate of, let's say, this could reduce your acquisition cost by 10 to 20%, and that helps you build that kind of business case. My advice is always take the most pessimistic view on that and see that the case still really works before you dive in. So let's take in that case the 10% and make your own calculations. And from there, you basically get to the point that David described, where you essentially have now a technology problem. You know you want to do this, you know the case, you know the typical impact. Your problem now is, how do I get the data from here to there, and with what connectors and systems, etc. And then you're in the right place to start selecting vendors and start asking questions on whether they can actually do that for you.
Right. Thanks for that. For the sake of time, I see we have 5 minutes left, 4 minutes actually. Because this is, I think, also very interesting for the audience. If we have any questions still parked, we can address them afterwards. But what are your thoughts on where CDPs will be in 5 years' time?
There's a privacy question, which let me address very briefly, because sometimes we talk about GDPR as like, the CDP vendor full employment act, because so much of what you have to do to support data privacy is what you have to do to build a CDP. You have to find out where all that personal data is. You have to build connectors to bring it together. You have to create a unified view. You have to keep track of what you're doing with it. Those are all exactly the things that you have to do to build a CDP, and they're also all among the many things you have to do to comply with data privacy regulations. So the CDP is an important enabling technology for a great many of privacy compliance requirements. And some CDPs even have the actual consent management modules built in, or they've integrated with the third-party consent modules. So CDPs are very, very supportive of privacy compliance. Whether it's the actual master and the legal basis, he's talking about consent collection, I think there, again, the CDP is a good place to store your consent if you got no place else to store it. Now, you might have a separate consent manager system, in which case you store it there, but even so, you want to look at those consents connected to the CDP. So when somebody pulls out a segment for a particular purpose, you can actually check it against the consent to make sure that record you're pulling out appropriate consents. That's all something that can be managed. Doesn't have to be managed in the CDP, but can be managed very conveniently through a CDP. So just wanted to address that, because it's actually an important issue for CDP vendors. Where CDPs will be in 5 years, the function will be there. People will have unified customer profiles. That's what a CDP does. Will it be called a CDP? Will it be something that you buy or that you've built or assembled? You know, who knows? But I think the notion of a central customer database will definitely be with us in 5 years, and hopefully it'll still be called a CDP. Otherwise, I'll have to change the name of the CDP Institute, and we have a lot of letterhead printed. We don't want to do that.
We'll make it the Institute, formerly named CDP.
Formerly known.
Yeah. I think if you look 5 years ahead, and of course that's something we dream about in our free time as well. Also because we're one of the ones that have to build it if it has to be there in 5 years. For us, it's very much I think about continuing that differentiation in the space, right? David did a lot of work helping the CDP topic get more clarity on driving that definition, like what is and isn't the CDP. But I think we'll see in the coming 5 years more differentiation on what are the add-on functions to what do you do with that unified data. And so for some that will be in the delivery side of things, where they really drive strong channel engagement. For Relay 42, it's very much in what we call the orchestration side of it. So that's AI-driven decisioning, one of the question marks that David had, on top of that data. So it's using the centralized view that I think will be around for much more than 5 years even, into more automated decision-making and then more marketer support. Because we clearly see a need where a lot of people now get access to a lot more data, but don't necessarily always know what to do with it. And we think that technology can really help there, make those things easier, make it more accessible. And I think in parallel, not just for Relay 42, but for everyone in the CDP industry, we already see a rapid expansion in the types of channels and the types of data that are being fed into this 360 view. And I think that will continue. If you asked us 5 years ago how much call center data was in there, it was maybe 1 or 2 clients actively in real time connecting calling data and those kind of things. Now I would say it's nearing half the clients actually connecting those kind of service channels in there as well. So that is another development that I think in 5 years will probably continue to grow for many in the market.
All right.
Yeah. I know we're out of time, so I agree with all that. You know, we're going to see more specialized CDPs. We're going to see deployment, more and more use cases outside of marketing. We will see more data sources, as Tomas just said. So it's going to continue to grow in a number of dimensions and specialize. Just as an industry matures, that's a normal thing to happen.
All right. Yeah. With that, I'd like to wrap up the webinar at exactly 3 p.m. Wow. I think we can all say, without going into too much detail, that say the topic of CDPs, I think we agreed that they're not just a hype, they're here to stay. They will diversify in various directions, which will remain a challenging decision for potential CDP buyers to find out which is the right solution for them, right? Do you need a CDP, or will a CDP benefit you? Start with your strategic ambitions, but also certainly your hands-on use cases, and see what the data you need does, where are the gaps, and can a CDP help you out there? What I wanted to mention before I finally thank Tomas and David is towards the audience is that, yes, Ricardo, the recording will be made available, and you will also receive our CDP ebook, which will also give some guidance about CDPs in more general. Of course, we have more content on CDPs specifically. So please feel free to reach out to, and the contact data is on the slide, to Relay 42 team directly in the chat at Kalina or at Josephine, who'll be staying online a little bit. You can follow us, of course, on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow the CDP Institute on LinkedIn or go to our respective websites, relay.com/contact or cdpinstitute.org/contact. And I think that wraps it up for today. So Thomas, thank you for joining us. And David, I'm not sure whether he can hear us. I can't see him anymore, but he is unmuted. So a lot of thanks for joining us in the morning. I hope you have a great day. And I wish you all the best.
Thanks a lot.
That's us signing off.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye, David. Thank you.
Bye.